Hey everybody, this is Chris Thompson and welcome to session 12 of Brain Software with Dr. Mike Mandel. He's got a very large cup of Tim Hortons coffee. He'd rather fix the connections in your brain than hook up a DVD player. And he has a conference call in exactly 38 minutes. Mike, good to have you.
That's right, so let's get moving on this. What do we got today?
Oh, we've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. I want to start off with a question that we got from Ryan in Toronto here. And this is a good one because he had asked about self-hypnosis. So, Mike, I know you've always got some interesting new thoughts on how you're doing self-hypnosis. So tell me what are some of the latest and greatest things you've discovered about using self-hypnosis?
Well, there's a really, really cool method that's extremely easy to learn, and anybody listening to this can apply it essentially immediately. The old model of self-hypnosis is fairly antiquated now insofar as it basically deals with the hypnotist as the subject and as the observer. So it causes a threefold dissociation, which is very difficult to manage. And by that, I mean, if I'm doing hypnosis work with another person, heterohypnosis, I am the hypnotist, and they are the subject, and they are also observing the state in a trance. And anyone who's been in a good trance triggered by another person knows what I mean. You're both in the trance and looking at it, sort of in a dissociated position. Part of you is saying, why not just get up? You're just sitting there. And the other part goes, leave me alone. I like it here. So there's dissociation that happens. And dissociation is a major part of hypnosis. Now, the problem, historically speaking, with self-hypnosis has always been that it now overburdens the subject, forcing him or her to be the subject and the observer and the hypnotist as well. So there's a tri-dissociation or threefold dissociation happening, which can be very difficult to manage when you are hypnotizing yourself, being in trance, and observing yourself at the same time. And so the best methods have found ways to completely circumvent this. Erickson came up with some terrific methods. My probably favorite one is when he would just tell someone, if you want to do self-hypnosis, just sit down in that chair and go into a trance. And the best way is to pre-frame in advance exactly how long you want to be in trance and for what purpose, and how you're going to feel when you awaken. So it's, I'm going into hypnosis for 15 minutes for the purpose of X, and when I awaken, I will feel, and it's going to be one of two choices, either alert, refreshed, and ready for anything, or it's going to be tired, sleepy, and ready for bed. Between those two, you'll find you'll cover just about everything. So in advance, you read this aloud or say it aloud. I am going into hypnosis for typically 15 minutes to 30 minutes is adequate for the purpose of X, which could be improving my reading speed or increasing my immune function and improving it, whatever it is. And when I awaken, I will feel A or B, either awake, wide awake, alert, or tired and sleepy and ready for bed. So you say this in advance congruently, signifying your intention to your unconscious mind, which doesn't miss a thing. And as Larry Nims really nicely pointed out, the unconscious is monitoring everything all the time, although he says subconscious. We're talking about the same thing. He said it's even monitoring your conscious mind and what it's thinking. So it doesn't miss anything. So when you set it up like this, you then go into a hypnotic state. Now, here's the method I recommend you use. It's a little better than just waiting for hypnosis to happen. Pick something to focus on. Sit upright in a comfortable chair rather than lying down. You don't want to fall asleep. Pick something above your eye level to focus on with your eyes and your vision. Fairly easy to stare at, whether it's a dot on the wall or a bright object. It doesn't really matter. But you stare at that and take a long, slow breath through your nose. And as you exhale, you close your eyes. Then as you inhale slowly and deeply, you open your eyes and look back at it. And every time you exhale, you slowly close your eyes and just continue doing this until it becomes too much trouble to open your eyes again, in which case trance will have very, very quickly developed.
And that sounds like fractionation for all the hypnosis students out there.
It certainly does seem to have a bit of that built in, Chris.
Yes. So, fantastic. Hey, since you mentioned dissociation, I thought this might be a good time to ask you to talk a little bit about dissociation, because it's used as a technique in NLP, right? Or, I mean, it's a natural process to dissociate, but we use dissociation to overcome personal limitations, bad feelings from the past, things like that. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how someone might use dissociation to, let's say, overcome some negative feeling from their past.
Well, dissociation primarily is a means of creating a degree of separation from either your conscious and unconscious mind, separating from each other, which happens naturally with trance, or you can dissociate from your hand so it doesn't feel like your own hand and may become numb, or you can have it right while you're in a hypnotic state, while consciously you have no awareness of what it's doing. Separation of the various parts of the aspects of our thinking processes and personality are what dissociation is. Now, it's a very, very useful thing. Dissociation can be utilized to create a resistance to pain. I've used that in the dentist chair by simply imagining I'm floating up above myself. Now, I'm not talking about astral projection here. I'm just talking about imagining I'm in an observer mode above myself, looking down at the dentist doing the dental work on me, and the pain is immediately lessened as a result. Because association, being inside yourself, inside your own skin, is essential to adequately feel emotions and also physical sensation. So you can use dissociation even by taking an event in your past. Let's say it should be an event that's not too remarkably painful, because you don't want to deal with a screaming phobia like this unless you have some degree of training. But dissociating from an unpleasant event in the past, if you watch the memory externally, watching yourself in the memory rather than feeling the memory and experiencing it from the inside, the negative charge will be greatly reduced. So dissociation is a very, very powerful thing, and it's a useful way of creating trance states, of utilizing trance states, getting rid of pain, whether it's physical pain or pain from trauma, to the emotions or whatever.
Okay, now this makes me think about something that you said a couple of weekends ago when you did a guest presentation for a group here in Toronto.
Oh, yes.
And we were talking about memory. I can't remember who asked the question now, but there was a question that came up about memory, and you pointed out that short-term memory is electrical in nature, long-term memory is chemical. Is that correct?
Essentially, the model I work by, and again, once again, this is only a model, so all the neuroscientists out there listening, and do you like my presupposition that there's hundreds and thousands of neuroscientists in the world who have nothing better to do than to listen to this stupid podcast? But you don't need to write and tell me it's incorrect. I'm just using this as a model, so there's a degree of accuracy in it. Short-term memory appears to be electrical in nature. It is a scratch pad that fills up very, very quickly. Long-term memory is a protein molecule, and archive memory is long-term memory that is now copied into the unconscious mind and isn't typically available, even though it still exists at some level and can sometimes be triggered through hypnosis and other states. So when you are learning something and initially memorizing it, repetition will deeply ingrain it and build in new neural pathways and help you remember it. Now, over time, as you review material, then it becomes much easier to maintain the memory. Even stuff we know inside out, over time will fade if we are not periodically touching up the memories, or at least reviewing the material in a degree that will enhance them and make them stronger and easier to recall. For example, this weekend, I'm teaching a hypnosis course for NLP Canada training at the University of Toronto. It'll be over by the time you hear this podcast, but even though I've taught this for 18 years, a couple of times a year, and know the material inside out, I still spend a couple of days reviewing the material and looking at hypnosis, even though I'm doing hypnosis all the time, just to ensure it's all at my fingertips. Repetition is essential to maintain memory.
Okay, so the reason I brought it up about talking about memories is when we talk about using dissociation to change the way a past memory affects us. You had pointed out that every time you access a long-term memory from the past, you change it.
Any memory.
Right, any memory. Okay, so then dissociation, accessing a past, let's say making a little mental movie of something that happened in your past that was a little bit disturbing to you, accessing it changes it. And if you access it enough in a dissociated state, is that enough to just de-traumatize the whole memory?
It depends on the intensity of the trauma. With a very severe trauma, there will be adrenaline setting the emotion and setting the memory, which is what I count on to a large degree doing forensic hypnosis with different police forces and police services, is that the adrenaline will often burn the memory in at the time and make it very, very clear with a traumatic thing like a bank robbery or a murder or something of that nature. And so it really, really depends on the intensity of the trauma. However, as we just said, accessing any memory will change it, even just to a microscopic degree. But small changes over numerous reaccessing of the same memory will change it radically. I went out with a girl many years ago who was convinced that she used to get an umbrella when she was 4 years old, climb up onto the roof of their house and jump off and float down like Mary Poppins. And I explained the physics of it and how extremely unlikely it was. and also questioned how she would even be able to get on the roof as a 4-year-old child and why her parents would permit this to happen. But she wasn't having any of it. She was convinced this had happened. And at some point, she had set a memory of this and had rehearsed it and reviewed it so many times, it had become absolutely burned in and was indistinguishable to her from a completely fantasized experience, which this no doubt was.
That is completely bizarre. But that's why we have these podcasts to talk about those things. All right, let's move on to a question from Ricardo in Ottawa. And this is a good one. So he said, Mike, I heard you mention human givens theory on a prior podcast, and I was looking into it. It looks really interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about it and how it relates to hypnosis?
Okay, I am no expert in human givens theory by any stretch of the imagination. I have studied it, read books on it, and I think it is a remarkable model. It came out of Britain, a couple of psychologists, and they came up with this unifying idea that I think is absolutely groundbreaking. Basically states that the REM state that we find ourselves in during sleep, which is really in an alpha state, and it's, our eyes are moving rapidly, we're experiencing bizarre dreams. Basically, the human givens theory states that the REM state operates very, very frequently when we are young, and it is unpacking all the software that we will require to function as human beings, interacting with others, learning, and so on. And that is happening, sort of installing the software during the REM state. Now, when we become adults, and our brains are developing up until about age 20, when we become adults, what then happens is every night when we go to bed, if there is undischarged emotion, negative emotion, fear, anger, sadness, trauma, grief, whatever, that we were dealing with that particular day, human givens theory states that the REM state is then used to diffuse the negative emotion through the use of metaphor in dreams. And if you get really bizarre dreams and you can track them back carefully, you will discover there is a direct correlation between the dream and what occurred negatively the day before, or what you had not yet negatively processed. Now, the reason this relates to hypnosis is human givens then says the basic things we require for life, which are need to belong, need to feel significant, need to be part of a group, need to be stretched and encouraged to move on into different areas of our lives, need to do something that is worthwhile, and so on. We have all these needs, and we also have some software built in, which we can then utilize to fulfill the needs. Things like the ability to keep long-term memory, which enables us to learn and continue to grow, the ability to feel emotions and to empathize with other people. And empathizing with them is part of the human givens theory as well. It builds the bridges and the connections. So this mix of things we are endowed with from birth and a set of needs are the human givens. Now, if these things are met and our resource states are applied to all of these various needs, then we will tend to be functional and mental illness will not exist. If we are lacking any of the givens, we do not feel significant or do not feel secure or do not belong to an adequate social group, if we do not give and receive attention, whatever it is, to that degree, we will have problems. And the connection with hypnosis is over time, if the problems continue to develop and due to sleep disturbance or whatever, the REM state during sleep is not processing metaphorically through dreams all these negatives, then the REM state begins to intrude into the waking life. And the person will start to experience hallucinations, disorders, panic, paranoia, delusions, all sorts of things like that. So the human givens theory basically states that hypnosis is simply a hacking into the REM state, which is why Erickson's brilliant metaphors serve the exact same purpose of the dreams the person would be having to integrate the negative emotions, he says, in a very circumlocutory fashion.
So the guys who came up with this human givens theory, had they studied any hypnosis? Blah, blah, blah. I can't even say the word hypnosis.
Well, they must have, because they're very conversant with Erickson's work. And he shows up repeatedly in their book. And I highly recommend it. I have no connection with these people whatsoever other than applauding them for creating a unifying way of understanding so many psychotherapeutic interventions that work, and also those that are basically anti-therapies that don't work, that mostly involve talking about problems endlessly and reinforcing them over and over and over.
And the book that you recommend, is it just called The Human Givens Theory?
Yeah, it's just called Human Givens, or The Human Givens. But it's really, really good. They've written extensively on anxiety and on depression as well, and how when someone is in an anxious state or a depressed state, you immediately look and go down the inventory and determine which of these are missing from their life. Oh, I get no attention, or I'm not belonging to a social group. And by the way, the ideal social group is no more than 150 people. After that, we begin to lose all the social contacts. They begin to thread out and thin out too much, which is why a lot of churches grow and grow and grow, and organizations grow and grow and grow. And when they become enormous, all of a sudden people feel lost. And that's why they set up small groups and things in order to meet that need with people. So we typically do well with up to about 150 social contacts. So if those are being met, and the givens are being met, the person will be healthy. If the person's depressed or anxious, we can presume that one or more of these are not being met. And as soon as the person actively puts the pieces back in place and begins to deal with them, all of a sudden the problems begin to disappear. Now, it's really up to the individual. We're back to dissociation here, Chris, because one of the things the human givens approach mentions that I found really interesting is, as human beings, being self-aware, we have reflexive thinking. We can think about thinking, and I don't know if dolphins can, or, they certainly never painted anything of the order of, The Last Supper or Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Dolphins are really smart, but they don't do that kind of thing as far as we know. But we have reflexive thinking. We can think about thinking. And one of these aspects is that we can step back and look at our emotions. We can look at what we've learned, and we can say, those are things I've learned, those are things I'm doing, but they aren't me. There's a me, an I, that's behind all of this that enables us to step back and look at the situation. And a lot of therapy is dissociating from the situation, looking at it externally, and then finding out which needs need to be met, and systematically and congruently building them in and letting the problems disappear.
It really is just like changing the camera angle, isn't it? You're looking at a problem from a different perspective.
Well said, young man. I like that one.
All right. So we're making good progress here, jumping through all the questions, and let's keep going because I know you have a conference call to get on. Next question is, this is a good one. This came from Paul, who was at the guest presentation you did, and he was asking questions about how to build a confident state. And you answered in, I thought was really interesting. You said to use the as-if frame. So let's talk about what the as-if frame is and how you can use that to build powerful, resourceful states.
Okay, well, that's one way of approaching the question of confidence, self-confidence in social settings or whatever they are. You first of all have to determine what would this state look like, feel like, sound like if you had it. And who does have that already? So you can model somebody who has this. You can imagine them standing before you, looking and breathing and sounding like they're confident, and them giving the presentation you want to give. And you watch this in a dissociated way, that really powerful, congruent person, whoever it is to you. And then you can imagine looking at yourself, doing the exact same thing with the same gestures, motions, and that, and keep fine-tuning it until you like the way it looks and sounds, and rehearse it externally, and then stand up and step into that other you and act as if it's you now. And it's a way of rehearsing this. John Grinder showed me that one of the best ways of getting these particular shifts from other people is when you watch them doing micro movements. So if someone's gesturing in that, you don't gesture like they're gesturing. Even if you're watching them on a video, you're making microscopic movements of your own muscles that correspond to that. And by getting the physiological side of us involved as well, our physical body, it goes even deeper. So the as-if state is basically looking at something or hearing something, feeling something we want that someone else has, so we have someone who can model it, then we act as if we already have it based on what they are doing. How would you act if you had it? How would you talk if you were confident? How would you relate to people if you felt like you couldn't fail? Well, I don't know. Well, if you did know, well, I guess I'd be, would you breathe all shallow and, hunched over? No, of course not. You'd breathe upright. You'd put your shoulders back. You'd stand tall. You'd feel powerful. So you build these things in as if you already were confident and powerful. And the amazing thing about the as-if state is very, very quickly you'll discover it will map across and become your normal state.
So for the listeners out there, when you hear Mike say pretend and then pretend you're not pretending anymore, that's the
pretend you didn't hear him say that too.
That's the as-if frame, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And whenever we act as if we already had something, and congruently install every aspect of it to the best of our abilities, we'll gradually acquire more and more powerful states. We have the resources we need already. That's a given. It's one of the human givens. We have the resources. We simply have to install or apply or awaken them.
Okay, perfect. That was great. The next thing I wanted to come back to something that we talked about on podcast number 11. So we were talking about Marlene and the telemarketer, the fraud telemarketer.
Oh, yeah, she emailed me and thanked us for addressing that, actually.
Yes, I saw that email. That was great. So, hey, always we enjoy answering questions.
Thanks, Marlene.
It reminded me of a very similar experience. I wouldn't call it a fraud attempt in any case, but I had a door-to-door company, and they've come by four times now to my house. And their entire job is to try to get me to switch from using the hot water rental company that I use right now for the tank to switch over to them. But they don't want to disclose that they're trying to get me to switch over, so they have a very official government-sounding company name, Ontario Consumers something or other, I don't remember.
Oh, yeah. Name is everything, right? Like the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, so when they announce who they are or who they're with, it sounds like a real company that, you should be answering their questions. They are very congruent in their delivery. They're well-trained, young, I would say 20-year-olds usually coming by there, and they're well-presented, well-spoken.
So they're setting up an appeal to authority right away by seeming to be a government agency or derivative of it.
Yep, and they're wearing a costume. They're wearing a uniform that looks very professional. And
it looks official, I'm sure.
Yeah, it looks official. Yeah. So they present themselves, and the pitch was something along the lines of, I'm here from the Ontario Consumers such and such a company. We are in the neighborhood upgrading water tanks. I just need to come in and take a look at your tank to verify its eligibility for upgrade. So again, it's not a lie. They want to switch me over to them.
But so they want to see if you're eligible for them to have you work with them instead.
Exactly. They probably just need to verify I'm not on a contract or something like that. But it's really a disguised sales pitch. But the part I found fascinating is they're not trying to appeal to your logic of saving money with a more efficient tank or anything like that. They're using social psychology to try to get in your door, look at your tank, and then once you let them in, I'm sure that compliance
set is starting to work.
Exactly. Now here is the first time, the guy that came by the first time, he was the most elegant. I turned him away because I knew what he was up to, but he dropped the double bind, really smooth double bind at the end. So after he gave his pitch about how he just needs to come in and look at my tank to verify if it's upgradable, he says, so the only thing I need to know from you right now is, do you want my shoes on or off? And of course, I just said, well, listen, great double bind, but I'm not interested.
Nice presupposition that you were interested and you just want to know whether or not he should be tramping through your house with his boots on or not.
Mm-hmm. So keep your eyes out, folks, because
listen for the double binds, the social pressures. And even, Chris, some of the people who come to your door, one of the things they'll use to begin the yes set, and we said in a previous podcast that yes sets are delivered prior to compliance sets because it's easier to agree than obey. So we get people agreeing 3 to 5 times. Now, after they've agreed 3 to 5 times, we then make micro steps in getting them to comply. And one of the simplest things to get the yes initially to open the door can be you answer the door and they say, hello, do you live here?
Exactly.
No, I've just broken in. And I just happen to be answering the door because I'm concerned for the welfare of the people who live here, and I want to make sure they're getting a proper tank put in for their water heater. Of course I live here.
I'm going to say that next time. No, I just broke in. Oh, that's wonderful. So keep your eyes or ears peeled and see what...
Ears peeled?
That doesn't make any sense.
Mixed metaphor. Chris, you are not the sharpest brick in the elevator.
All right. So next time a telemarketer comes to your door, listen and pay attention and tell us if they dropped any interesting lines or tools of influence and persuasion.
Influence, how to resist it, and how to create it.
Yeah, let us know. We'll talk about them on future podcasts. Let's move on to insomnia because we're working on Mike's next product, which is going to be addressing getting a good night's sleep. We had a really good question, again, coming from the Toronto presentation that you did a couple of weeks ago. And the question was about, this was a hypnotherapist who was asking the question, look, if I'm dealing with a client who has insomnia, a lot of my clients, they feel like they think about the problem so much because they don't want it. The more they think about it, the more it just keeps coming back even worse and worse and worse.
Right, because it's the law of reversed effect.
That's what you
mentioned. As soon as we focus on it, we enhance it. The more what we resist persists, basically speaking. For those of you who are therapists who are dealing with insomnia, I recommend you utilize, and this will probably have to be our last question, maybe the penultimate one, Chris, but if you are dealing with insomnia with your clients, use the Mandel method and tell me what phenomenal results you get. Presume that the insomnia, putting aside any sort of medical problem that the doctor would have looked into to ensure that there is no underlying condition. Presume that the insomnia has some sort of secondary gain, that it is creating something for the person unconsciously. So all you do is you maintain the secondary gain while getting rid of the sleeplessness. And the method I use is you zone them through the floor in a powerful trance. Use whatever induction is your favorite. Once they're in trance, honor the unconscious mind, thank it for creating the insomnia, and say, what I would like you to do now, if this is agreeable to you, is to allow the subject to dream he has insomnia every night, but get a good night's sleep. So you fulfill the insomniac purpose by the vivid dream, but in reality, the person will sleep through the night. And every time I've used this, it's worked. It's been quite hilarious. People come in and say things like, no, I've still got the insomnia. I say, yeah, but you look all wide awake and refreshed now. Well, yeah, I guess I'm just able to get by on less sleep. They can't believe that they're not lying awake, and actually they're getting a full 7-8 hours.
That's hilarious. Do you ever let them have that suggestion fade away so they can adopt the belief that they are getting a full night's sleep once they've resolved the issues?
Good one. It typically does fade away over time anyway. It will just disappear on its own when it served the requisite purpose.
Right. So when it is no longer useful, it fades away.
And on that note, Chris, I'm going to have to run. So why don't you wrap this up?
Do we have a closing metaphor?
Okay, I'll give you.
You can't leave us without one.
I'll give you a really quick one. When we lived in England, it took us ages to get up the road to go anywhere. Even as a kid, I remembered this because my parents were invariably pulling across to the side of the road to make tea on a Coleman stove. I'm not kidding. They carried a little Coleman stove with them everywhere. And my dad made tea endlessly. He was the biggest tea drinker I've ever met in my life. He drank more of it, gallons and gallons of the stuff, and never seemed to have any bad effect, I guess because it's loaded with antioxidants. And it seems that all our trips to Wales and all over Britain were punctuated by numerous stops at the side of the road with a little Coleman stove and a kettle making endless cups of tea. And one evening I came home, and my father, when I was in my late teens, was sitting at the dining room table with a notebook and a slide rule. Back before there were digital calculators. And I said, what are you doing, Dad? I'm not making this up. He said, I am calculating the date that I will drink my 1 millionth cup of tea. And I don't know if he ever shared the date with me, but he went to that much trouble. And so when you are drinking tea next time, look and see if there's a slide rule handy. And if there is, you might want to make some sort of calculation of your own, not necessarily about that.
Beautiful. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody again for tuning in to podcast session 12 of Brain Software with Dr. Mike Mandel. I'm Chris Thompson, and you can head on over to iTunes to check out the podcast and subscribe if you're watching it or listening to it, I should say, from our website. Leave a rating in iTunes and head on over to the website, MikeMandelHypnosis.com, where you can sign up for our email list. We'll be sending out all kinds of cool stuff, including Mike's Brain Software ebook and tips and tricks and all kinds of hypnosis stuff. And finally...